Welcome to episode number 48 of the American Regularis Podcast. I'm your host, JD Walter, and we've got an absolutely jam-packed episode today. You're going to want to stick around. We got lots to talk about. Before we get into it, though, please like and subscribe. Follow me on YouTube. Like it. Share it with your friends. Whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Help me out with the algorithm there. Comment, like, subscribe. Tell your friends. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's reg_American1. If you want to email me to tell me something you like about the podcast or would like to listen about, email me at AmericanRegularisPodcast@gmail.com. Now, let's skin this cat. Originally, I wanted to do a podcast just entirely over the Romanian elections. And just the world moves too fast for this podcast going once a week. We got to talk about other stuff. If I somehow get a slow weekend here in the future, I would like to really deep dive it. But for now, I'm just going to give you a little bit of kind of the bullet points. And that Romania just had some primary elections recently. And the guy that won, it's a multi-party system. It's a lot of different parties. They have a prime minister and then, a president, and then the president elects the prime minister. And look, Romania is kind of a weird country. I mean, it starts back with Dacians and Romans sitting there. That's had Slavic influence. But in the middle of the, Eastern Europe, you have this Latin language speaking country that's very novel in that way, in its culture, its language, and its people of that area. Then during the 20th century, they were allies with the U.S. and Britain, and they gained some extra ground. And then in World War II, they were generally with the Nazis, and they were brutal in the way they followed nationalist ideologies and this Nazi stuff. Really dark stuff. Right after that, they fall under communism as the Soviet Union gets the eastern portions of Europe at the end of World War II. And their communism was extremely brutal. So their history is long and complicated and sort of a mess. Now, this elections, there's a man named Georgescu, is his last name, Kalen Georgescu, and he's an independent candidate, and he didn't get a majority over 50%. He got like 40% of the vote, which is pretty darn good in a multi-party thing. He's the favorite to win it. They canceled the election results, and they're running him up for election tampering, getting a little bit of money from here or there. I heard someone use a quote that said, if that's what's going to upset the apple cart with your democracy wasn't that strong to begin with. And it's one of those things I believe is probably pretty pervasive and ubiquitous throughout all of Romanian and just most democratic politics, is there's always some sort of campaign finance problems. However, they say, hey, no, you can't do it. And then just recently this week, when he had filed, he'd been detained when going in to apply to run again. And he had he tried to appeal to a court to be able to run again, and they've said no. They're not going to let him. Now, even the lady that took second in the elections that were canceled had this to say. His opponent, her name's Elena Lasconi, and she said the Constitutional Court's decision is illegal, amoral, and crushes the very essence of democracy. Right? And we've seen this, and the West tends to just want to be this, they just shout from a bullhorn, oh, democracy, the values, the virtues of democracy. And then we have a 2014 coup in Ukraine. We do these color-coded revolutions. We cry foul on election interference all the time if we don't like the elections. And this one is just blatant. Now, Georgescu isn't a peach. And Romania, like I said, has a pretty brutal history with communists and nationalists. This guy seems to be a nationalist. He's referred to basically different Romanian Nazis as heroes, and said a lot of things that I think is fair to have eyebrows raised about this guy. Now, he also doesn't believe in the human moon landing. I can kind of get on board with that. Considers climate change a global scam. I can get on board with that. He had one time mentioned in a podcast that carbonated juice contains nanochips, so he's a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, some which I think are pretty good, some which are pretty damn wild. But what he is he wants more of a neutral Romania where he's trying to work with the U.S. and Russia. And one of the things he very much opposes is I'm going to butcher this name, the Mihail Koganishanu NATO base. What that is, if you can forgive me for mispronouncing that name so bad, it is going to be the largest NATO base in Europe. Currently, that's Ramstein, Germany, the base in Ramstein, Germany, and this one's going to be 30% bigger, and it's situated right on the Black Sea, the key sea that borders, I mean, we're talking, what's it looking over, right? The Ukrainian coast, the Crimea, there's Russian borders on the Black Sea. It's there. They're building it there for a reason. Romania, in Georgescu's eyes, doesn't want that provocation there. He thinks it's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea. Why did Putin eventually invade Ukraine? Thought it was a security threat to have so much NATO missile defenses that could be switched over to shoot nukes. Georgescu's wanting to stay neutral. He wants to work both sides. He wants to focus on his own people. I'm not advocating for this guy. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not going to sit there. I certainly don't care about nationalist Romanian president. But his people seem to like him more than the others. And J.D. Vance denounced this, and he was right to do so, because if you're going to sit there and preach democracy, and then as soon as a guy who doesn't like NATO looks to be the heavy favorite, you can't just call off the whole elections. You're not in favor of democracy. You're in favor of the neoliberal global establishment of the West, like the Western hegemony. Like, that's what you're in favor of. And it's ugly. And you won't see it this way. And they will, like I said, I think the guy has some red flags on his report card, but they will make him literally Hitler, as is the case, right? When in truth is he's probably more like Trump, maybe a more extreme Romanian version, but that's what it is. And it seems to be that democracy is only important when democracy works for them. Which, by the way, I kind of would agree with that sentiment to some extent. I'm not a Democrat. I don't believe in democracy, really. It's a means to an end, and it usually helps with a peaceful transfer of power. But there's nothing inherent about a democratic vote that makes something better or worse. That's just silly. And the people that promote democracy all the time realize this, because when they don't get the result they want, they find a way to say this is null and void. Okay, I would like to go into that more later on, but we've got a lot more. The next thing I want to talk about is Donald Trump's newest Twitter beef. And forewarning, I can't be more against Trump on this. He's mad that Thomas Massie voted against the Republican CR bill. Thomas Massie wears the funding bill that's going to expand and increase spending in the government. And as the Republicans praise Doge all the time, here they go, and they just want to spend money and increase the deficit, increase the debt. Thomas Massie says no. And Donald Trump comes at him, demands that he calls him a second-rate politician. He demands that he should be primaried and that guy will have his full support. He says Thomas Massie's not America first. He put quotations, congressman in quotation marks, and he's bringing the knives out at Thomas Massie. Now, I know Twitter feeds, who you listen to. I've got my own echo chamber. But the amount of people that are supporting Thomas Massie is just wonderful. First off, Thomas Massie is just a principled libertarian. And a principled libertarian by nature will be America first, because that's what the Constitution presents itself as, and it keeps you away from foreign entanglements like George Washington talked about. Trump couldn't be more wrong. Thomas Massie is more principled and more America first by his very nature than Donald Trump can ever be. And it just kind of shows you that, like, a lot of libertarians, including myself, have been very excited about some of the stuff Trump's doing. But it just shows you that it's when he does stuff that a libertarian or an anarchist or just a person that really loves freedom or liberty, when Trump does things that are in line with that, sometimes it's out of common sense, like Trump loves to say. Sometimes it's out of happenstance. And sometimes it's just a roll of the dice. Like Trump is unpredictable. If you can call him anything, he's unpredictable. And just short-sighted. I don't think he realizes what a losing argument he has. Now, he might be able to bully forward his ideas, and the people that love Trump no matter what, blue no matter who, was the thing. So it's like the same thing happens on the right. Trump could fart on a piece of legislation. He could fart on an executive order and they'd think it was the greatest thing to ever come out. He's just wrong. If anyone wants to have a good, sincere argument about the principles or the intelligence or the ideas of Thomas Massie as compared to Donald Trump, what an easy, lopsided debate for Thomas Massie. So I've seen so many people come out and support Thomas Massie. It's the first time you've ever really seen a consensus among all of us bickering, fickle libertarians that always use the no true Scotsman thing. All the libertarians support Thomas Massie. And then you have guys like Brett Weinstein. You have many others that aren't libertarians that are saying, no, this guy, you got to support Massie. He's principled. Even those that don't agree with Massie have to admit that he's principled. And so Trump's just really dropped the ball on this. He should have Thomas Massie sitting at his right hand at the dinner table. He should be a consigliere, if you guys are Godfather fans, to Donald Trump. When Donald Trump is at odds with him for some trout-shouldered weasel like Mike Johnson, that just shows you that Trump can still be manipulated. Right? He was manipulated last time during COVID, and right now he's being either manipulated or just buffaloed or whatever you want to call it by Mike Johnson and all of these big spending money Republicans. And to quote our 47th president, sad. All right. One other thing before, a couple other things, excuse me. Few episodes back, I don't remember how many at this point, I talked about what a disaster Syria was going to be since Assad was removed, and that, timber sycamore and everything the U.S. government and its allies have done to destabilize Syria and overthrow Assad has just really started to come to fruition, right? Christians, Druze, and Alawites, which are a Shia adjacent Muslim group, and I apologize if you're a Muslim listening and that sounds pretty incorrect, but I'm not an expert on it. But it's a faction or sect of Islam. They're being murdered right now in the thousands. Christians, Druze, Alawites, by people who, while the Al-Jilani, is it Al-Jilani? He's sitting there saying, hey, don't do it. We're going to form a committee to make sure you don't do it. This is the leader who basically had direct ties. He was an ISIS member. He had $3 million warrant, something like that on his head. He's the interim government president now. We had funded him directly. Then we had a warrant on him. Whatever. He's saying don't do it, but basically there's letting vigilantism go on, and it is despite the little press quotes by him, he's also said, hey, will you quit filming all this murder? It's kind of it's bad PR. I think that's kind of a way of letting you know that this is state, if not sponsored, it's state condoned or interim state condoned. These murders, you can't make me believe that a guy who was ISIS just the other day and Jabhat al-Nusra just the other day, or I forget the other one it was. They do so many dang name changes. You're not going to convince me that the killing of Christians and Druze and Alawites is upsetting him. And you're not going to convince me that he's not in support of it. And the media is going to be silent on this because they're going to be told from our government, don't really talk about this because this is the seeds that we planted, and now, this evil's being reaped. And we'll probably have an episode about this in the future because I don't see anywhere where this gets looking better anytime soon. There's speculation that there will be a proxy war between Israel and Turkey on it, which will just mean more suffering for all these people in Syria. And they've had it as bad as anyone because of, a number of reasons, right? Radical Islam, globalist neocon warhawks, the CIA, whatever. So forgive me for when I'm not going super in-depth on all of these, but we just have so many things to get over today. This is almost like a week in review. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is Ukraine. And big news has happened today. Earlier today in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, there were negotiations that went on. And Trump and Marco Rubio came out and said that they have gotten Zelensky and the Ukrainian government to agree to ceasefire terms, right? A cessation of firing, a ceasefire. So they'll say, hey, we're willing to not fight for a month if Russia agrees not to fight for a month. And what Ukraine will get, since now that they're agreeing to a ceasefire, is Trump says he will open back up aid and intelligence. So they'll get access back to satellites, whatever else. They'll get intelligence, which has been huge for them. And then the tap or faucet or valve or whatever you want to call it in DC is going to open back up, and the taxpayer money can start flowing into Ukraine again to fund this hopeless war. Now, ceasefires take two people, because if you put your hands behind your back, say you're not going to hit anymore, it doesn't mean the other guy's not going to. So Trump and Rubio say, okay, now we're excited. We got to go talk to Russia and see if they'll agree to these terms. Hopefully they agree to this step towards peace. This isn't going to happen, guys. I can't in any logical realm believe that Russia would accept a ceasefire. Somewhat because Lavrov, Putin, and every other person with power and a voice in the Russian War Department has said, we're not going to do a ceasefire. We've said what our conditions are. They want to denazify Ukraine. They want the 4 oblasts, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia. And they want, not only do they want guarantees that Ukraine won't be in NATO, they do not want peacekeeping people in the area. So they don't want to say, okay, Ukraine's not NATO, but we're going to, put a bunch of troops here to keep the peace. They won't accept any of that. And they don't have to because they're winning. Since aid and intelligence is funded up, Russia's started to move faster. The one little feather in the hat of Ukraine was that they controlled an area of Russia called Kursk that they did on an offensive. It is folding up as we speak, day by day, like laundry. It's a slow-moving war. Ground isn't given easily in this war. The rate at which this land is being given, however, is very fast. Russia is not only taking it and will have their land back before too long, they will likely be enveloping a large amount of Ukrainians that have the best equipment. And Ukrainians just don't have the troops to deal with a large loss, like a large surrender or kill box like that. Earlier this week, the Russians had all their men, or a whole bunch of men, go through the gas lines that have been shut off by Ukraine. They used them as tunnels and flanked Ukrainians. I think I saw one thing that said there might have been 4,000 dead in one day. I don't put a lot of stock in numbers, but they are rolling up that region. The last card that Ukraine was really holding was Kursk, but it wasn't ever really that much of a card because we knew it'd be inevitable that Russia would take over Kursk. All right? Now, as we look and we go on, what is Russia going to get out of this peace deal? What does a ceasefire bring them? It brings their gains, which, like I said, are slow but consistent. It brings those to a halt. It gives the chance for Europe, who's been trying to start to rattle sabers and talk about ramping up aid to Ukraine, as previously it looked like the United States was not going to. It gives them a chance to try to ramp up production so eventually maybe they can be on par with Russia in terms of artillery and drones. Ukraine can't match men, but it would give them a little more time to drag more men off the streets and put them to the front line. The ceasefire benefits only Ukraine. If you had a guy in a rear naked choke and he said, let's take a 30-second break and then we'll get back to fighting, you wouldn't do it. You say, no, I'm good. I'm here. I think we'll just do it this way. Also, what is offered? What is going to be offered to the Russians? Because so far, Ukraine has never said that they're willing to give up any of the 4 regions that Russia controls right now. They don't control all of them in its entirety. But they've not said that. They've also said that if there is one, if they did give them up, they would still want a chance to get them in court later. I think Zelensky said this in either a podcast with someone or anyhow. He wanted to, they would want to be able to litigate or use some sort of legal works to get their land back. They still want to claim the Crimea, which will never happen. All of these things, and then, they still want to be in NATO, which I think is just more and more out of reach. So there's basically been no concessions for this ceasefire from Ukraine, as far as we've heard so far. And I can't imagine what concessions. I mean, ceasefires are temporary, so you're not going to give Russia the territory they want. Even if you said, hey, Zelensky, they'll hold elections in Ukraine for this ceasefire, maybe that would be something. I still wouldn't take that deal if I'm the Russians. There's just no way to entice it, to make you. Why would you fold a winning hand when you can see everybody's cards? And that's what's going on right now in Russia. This makes me wonder, what is the purpose of this ceasefire? I think it's optics, and I just can't for the life of me understand why the West, while Europe and while the United States is so darn focused on optics and stuff of immaterial and how does this look in PR, as opposed to anything of substance. And for Russia's faults, at least they kind of deal in reality, instead of dealing in marketing and opinions. And it's extremely frustrating because, as always, the result is, well, this result will be nothing except that we pay more tax. Ukrainians are still going to die. Russians will still die at a slower rate. And now we're paying for it again. And by that nature, probably extending it for more deaths. This ceasefire is not going to happen. It's going to be touted by Republicans, and Trump's going to be this peacemaker, but it's just not going to hold up. We have to find terms of surrender, as far as I can see. I just don't understand in what logical reality a ceasefire will work. Why would you take that? Okay, it's been a while since I've been showing clips and kind of talking about them. I like to do funny ones with The View and kind of laugh at the left. This is so ludicrous and so tone deaf and almost such parody of the left that you think this next bit should be hilarious. To me, it's not. And if you're listening with your kids or somewhere where like this audio is, I suggest for your ears only, not safe for work. And I find it absolutely repulsive. Bernie Sanders had a rally this week. I don't even know what it was for. I guess 90-year-old politicians just need money and attention. At this rally, he has a band perform. That's not unusual. Trump had the guys sing Proud to Be an American, which I'm sure you can look up, and I bet you there's an article on Salon or Slate or something that said how that was problematic. I bet you. Find me that article. I'm sure it's there, right? This person's lesser known. I don't even remember their name, and I don't even care to give them credit. It's a transgender singer, a man attempting to be a woman, not particularly succeeding at it. And this is a song that was at a political rally of one of the most famous, now technically Bernie Sanders is an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats. He's only an independent because the Democrats aren't commie enough for Bernie Sanders. Okay? This is what the left plays at their concerts, at their rallies.
Does your God have a big fat? 'Cause it feels like he's me.
And to the sound of applause, a transgender singer is singing a song, not particularly well, if I can even get past the blasphemy, about being sodomized by God. And the most cruel and vulgar words imaginable, right? The left tried to have like a moment of self, or we're supposed to. Some people said, hey, maybe after you lose the popular vote to a guy as controversial as Donald Trump, and you lose every swing state, and you lose the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court, maybe it's time to take a look in the mirror and say, what are we doing wrong? And it seems like they still have no clue. They just want to be controversial for the sake of being controversial. And if anything is against something from the past or tradition or of any generally recognized good, it's bad because it's just therefore not progressive. I don't know what it is. It's absolutely insane that this is at a political rally of a major political figure in the United States of America. It's absolutely insane. Can you imagine? Like, growing up as a kid, would you ever think this is what politicians have? It's scuzzy. And look, I believe in God. I'm a Christian. If you're an agnostic, an atheist, whatever you are, it's not classy. You have to admit, like, there's nothing classy about this, like that type of language. And like, fair enough, Trump uses bad language, but there's something particularly like the explicit vulgarity of this song is just. Do you think there weren't any kids at that rally? Not one. And look, like, not saying you have to raise Christian kids or any. Is there anyone that wouldn't want their kids to hear anyone speak in that way, whether they're transgender or atheist or not? Who wants people to speak like that in front of their kids? Who thinks that is representative of whether it be Republican or Democratic ideals and virtues that will help, lead your society in a better direction through political action? It's absolutely insane. And I sent it to one of my friends, and the first thing he texted back to me was that he didn't realize that the DNC and Hillary Clinton were so based for kneecapping Bernie Sanders during the 2016 election. Obviously, if they thought it would get him votes, these guys would probably do the exact same thing. But man, one theme that's really came out from 2025 is that I just have no time to try to reason, or like, I remember Bernie Sanders people. I'm like, well, at least he has the right instinct that there's something wrong. Just all of his ideas are wrong. I have nothing left to say. If you're a Bernie Sanders fan, I don't have anything good to tell you about this guy. He's trash. He's a godless commie. What else can you say? He's a godless commie with no moral fortitude, and his principles are just the dimmest shadows that the least bit of light erases. So, it's been a busy week on that. In the future, we're likely going to talk about a lot more of these similar topics. We'll probably be going in a lot more on Ukraine, as we often do. I imagine the situation in Syria and the situation in Romania might take deep dives, but there was simply too much this past week to try to leave stuff out. If you kind of like the format of more topics, let me know. And if you'd rather me kind of stick maybe to one or two main topics, hammer on it, let me know that too. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.